So hello everyone and welcome to our fifth Prize Papers Lunch Talk, lecture of the winter. My name is Lucas Haasis. I'm the Prize Papers Projects Research Coordinator, and together with Dagmar Freist, the Project Director, as well as Amanda Bevan, the head of the National Archives Prize Papers team, I'm one of the organizers of this online lecture series on research relating to the Prize Papers collection. We are simply overwhelmed by the unwavering interest in this lecture series, which I'm sure is due to the wonderful speakers, such as today's excellent speaker, Éva Guillorel, who have been enriching the series from the very beginning. As Éva already knows, I was sorely disappointed because I missed her at the Global Privateering website launch 3 weeks ago, which, however, makes me even happier about being able to welcome her as a speaker of the lunch talks now. Fortunately, it was possible to follow the Global Privateering event hosted by Katja Antunes, Tessa de Boer, and my friend Siem van Eten online, which is how I came to hear about the great news that Éva was successful in obtaining a research grant to study Saint-Malo ships and prize papers at the University of Rennes, in order to also establish links between the records of French and British prize papers starting next year. This, as well as the fact that I'm highly fascinated by your research on the songs you will be talking about today, are the reasons why I'm certain that we will get the opportunity to meet in person within the near future as well. We have, of course, already been keeping in touch via email. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Éva Guillorel, presently working as a lecturer for modern history at Rennes 2 since 2020. Éva Guillorel studied history, ethnology, and Celtic languages at the University of Rennes and Brest. After obtaining her doctorate in modern history for researching orally transmitted songs in criminal archives, she became a postdoctoral researcher at Harvard University and the University Laval in Quebec, as well as junior research fellow at Oxford University. She then worked as a lecturer for modern history at the University of Caen, normally between 2011 and 2020. As a junior member of the Institut Universitaire de France since 2018, she is currently working on a project titled, oh my French, Ce que chanter veut dire dans l'espace atlantique colonial français, oralité, circulation, appropriation, mémoire, which translates to what singing meant in the French colonial Atlantic area, orality, circulations, appropriations, memories. Her research particularly focuses on the history of and ethnology of oral cultures in Brittany and Western France, as well as on cultural and religious circulations and transfers between France and French-speaking America, and she has received multiple awards for her work in the past. In 2022, Éva Guillorel and Robert Boutillier worked on the prize papers collection together, publishing an article called Chansons des traditions orales et circulation maritime au oh no, 18th siècle d'après les archives britanniques des prize papers, meaning songs of oral traditions and maritime circulations in the 18th century according to the British Archive of the Prize Papers in the Journal Revue d'Ethnologie de l'Amérique française. Today, however, she will be talking about Charmante Margerite, fait, mais, adieux, the circulation of French songs on ships in the 17th and 18th century. Éva, I would like to thank you for being here today, and the stage is now yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Lucas, the organizers. Sorry for the many French words in this presentation, and thank you to for all of you to coming. I see many researchers here in the room that I have seen in archive centers or other places. So thank you for coming. And I would like also to say a special thank to the wonderful team of the prize papers at Kew, whose help has been extremely precious to me for this research. I'm going to present, and maybe I'm going to share now a PowerPoint with you. Yes? All right. Is it okay? I'm going to present today a research I'm conducting on the circulation of oral cultures and especially songs. And today I'm going to focus on folk songs circulating between France and French Atlantic colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries. Here, briefly, I define folk songs as songs for which we know multiple versions, including textual and melodic variants, transmitted from generation to generation over a long period of time, mainly through oral transmission, which does not exclude written influences, of course, and the use of written media. So it's what folklorists define as oral tradition. And studying oral tradition and the circulation of oral cultures is a challenge because, by definition, orality does not leave traces, and almost always folk songs are invisible in written archives. So the main sources we have to work on folk songs are the ethnographic collections gathered from the 19th century up to the present day. When we put in parallel ethnographic collections of French songs made in Europe and in North America, it's striking to see that a large part of the repertoires are the same on both sides of the Atlantic, with musical and textual variants, of course. So it's easy to conclude that many songs traveled from one side to the other, which is not surprising at all, because thousands and thousands of people migrated from France to New France since the beginning of the 17th century and circulated in the Atlantic space. And because it was not easy to bring many physical items with them during the travel, they brought what they had in their mind, including folk tales, folk songs they had learned from their families and neighborhood, and which were part of a common culture. So we can easily observe how French songs were rooted in North American oral tradition in the 19th century. But most of these songs were composed long before that time, in the early modern period. But it's much more challenging to document their circulations in the 17th and 18th centuries. For that period, we can trace orality only coincidentally in written archives like in trials, ordinances, chronicles, letters, travelers' journeys. There is a corpus of such documents in France and in North America, but it's mainly a static corpus located in a specific place at a specific time, and we don't see songs moving in space. We don't see them crossing the sea, and we observe all sorts of songs, but few folk songs having later passed into oral tradition. And this is why the prize papers are so interesting, because we can trace some of these songs just as they were circulating on ships in the 17th and 18th century. The first thing I'd like to say, I can't move my slide.
Maybe try again. Maybe stop sharing and then again.
No. Oh, okay. Maybe here. Yes. Sorry. Is it okay? Do you see the second slide? Yes. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to say about these songs in the prize papers is that the songs are only a very, very small part of all the documents we find in the prize papers, of course, and folk songs are only a very small part of all these songs, because we find hundreds of French songs in the prize papers, but most of them have not circulated in oral tradition for what we know, or at least they have never been found nor collected during ethnographic surveys. Most of them are songs composed in the 18th century that were popular at that time because they were part of theater plays or operas or all sorts of musical entertainment. Here on the slide on the left, it's a theater play including many popular songs and tunes found in the papers of François Lavignol in the 1790s. And there are also versified compositions that could have been written by a member of a crew or a passenger during or before the sea journey, and for which we don't even know if they have been sung. We find such literate songs mainly in the archives of officers and educated passengers. And beyond texts of songs, we find traces of their circulations in some letters. For example, the box on the right here, we can find traces of song practices through the correspondence of François-Antoine Courtableau and Jean-Georges Dagneau, two 25-year-old friends sent from La Rochelle, Western France, to trade French wine and goods between Martinique, Guyane, and Quebec in 1754, and 36 letters belonging to Courtableau's personal archives were seized on Le Robuste in 1756. So the songs written down in the prize papers in the 17th and mostly 18th century, and having passed in oral tradition for what we know, correspond only to a couple of dozens of documents. So it's not so many, but extremely interesting. I'd like to say a few remarks on these folk songs. First, to say they are found on various forms, mainly manuscript, but also printed songs on broadsides, songs on separate sheets of papers or in notebooks, in logbooks, included in letters. For example, I focus on French songs, but we find many other languages, including English, Spanish, Dutch, German, Swedish, here on the left, Occitan, and on the right, if you have an idea, I can't identify this language. The song was found on a ship from Brittany, but it's not Breton, it's not Welsh. And if you have ideas, I'm very happy to identify this language. So we find, so I'm going to focus here on French songs, but there are others, of course. And we find French songs on French ships, of course, but also on Dutch ships where part of a crew often spoke French. And my last remark is that it's very rare to find musical scores, but the use of contrafactum, meaning the pre-existing tunes reused with new words to create a new song. This use of contrafactum allows to find a number of melodies because it was common to indicate the name of a pre-existing tune at the beginning of a text. I choose to concentrate on folk songs rather than on other songs because we can compare songs found in the prize papers with ethnographic surveys. And some songs found on ships in the 18th century are still being collected from oral tradition in the recent years. So it's extremely interesting to see how songs evolved in time and space during their circulations. And another thing is that many folk songs are known only through fieldworks recordings made in the 19th century or later. We have no element about where they come from, when and by whom they were composed before being adopted in oral tradition. And in this perspective, the prize papers are very precious because they prove that some of the songs found in ethnographic surveys were in use in the Francophone world long before they were written down by folklorists. In several cases, the prize papers are the first written trace of songs that have been recorded dozens or hundreds of times after that with different versions throughout the Francophone world. When analyzed not as a single piece, but integrated in the whole content of the papers found on a specific ship, we can also replace these folk songs in their context, in social context, cultural context in the colonial period. I'd like to mention just one example with this printed sheet with a song found on the Dutch ship De Fortuin, captured in the Channel in 1747, entitled Marinier Nouveau. And it was printed at the back of a song, another song, celebrating the French victory of Fontenoy in 1745. So it gives us precious information about the date of composition, or at least the date of printing, because it could be the republication of a song composed earlier. And this song was recorded from oral tradition in different places in Eastern Canada, in New Brunswick, and in Quebec in the second half of the 20th century. And before finding this broadside in the prize papers, we had no written trace prior to this 20th century fieldwork and no idea of how ancient the song was and where it came from. So all these elements are extremely rich to document the dynamics of folk songs on the long term and replaced in a social and cultural perspective. Now I'd like to take one example of a notebook, Jean Brizard's notebook, which includes several songs, including Charmante Margerite. So I'd like to take this example with this notebook belonging to a crew member of a merchant ship sailing from Nantes in the south of Brittany to the Caribbean island of Saint-Domingue. He made this journey several times in the 1770s. And it's not so clear on which ship the notebook was seized. The notebook is written with a very approximative dialectal and phonetic French and a clumsy handwriting showing that this man could read and write, but he was not fluent. His notebook is composed of various elements, drawings, accounts, short descriptions of his journeys in the Atlantic, lists of material and goods, drafts of commercial letters, and so on. But most pages are dedicated to the text of 4 songs that are all known for having circulated in oral tradition. And the first one, Chanson de deux jeunes amoureux, is a 28th stanza tragic ballad on the death of 2 lovers, Pyrame and Thisbe, related to a theme known since Roman times, which has been reused in different languages in Europe, in multiple novels, theatre plays in Shakespeare, for example, tales and songs, some of them being printed on broadsides. The interesting thing here is that the text is written phonetically, without marking the versified scheme. Brizard started a new line not when it's required according to the written standards of versification, but when there was no space anymore in his notebook at the end of a line. The text shows variations compared to the other text we know for this ballad, so it seems clear that Brizard copied this song after hearing it, and not from a written version. And we can imagine that he learned the song orally, but nevertheless he felt the need to write it down, and he dedicated 8 pages of his notebook to it. The 3 other songs in his notebook are also known in oral tradition. In one case, Me promenant sur le tard, the song is known through peddler literature printed in the 18th century in Europe, and also recent ethnographic recordings, but Brizard's version presents significant variants. In the second case, Pourquoi vouloir qu'une personne chante, the first written evidence dates from the 16th century, printed in Roland de Lassus' musical anthologies in 1576, but Brizard's version is much longer and closer to versions recorded later in 20th century Canada among French-speaking Acadian populations in Nova Scotia. And the last case is Charmante Margerite, Je te fais, mes adieux, a dialogue between a sailor and his sweetheart, in which the sailor announces that he's going to leave her to go to America, and she's desperate, a very common theme in such songs. So there are 8 stanzas of 8 verses. Here you can see the first 2 verses, and if you don't mind, I could sing a little bit. Charmante Marguerite, je te fais mes adieux, je pars pour l'Amérique, je vais quitter ce lieu, je vais voguer sur l'onde pour amasser du bien. En peu de temps, ma blonde, je reviendrai grand train. Quelle triste nouvelle, tu me perces le cœur. Un amant si fidèle, aurais-je le malheur de le voir sur l'onde, partir au gré des flots. Je n'ai plus rien au monde. Adieu, cher matelot. So this song is known by folklorists, thank you, but the most complete catalogue of folk song we have, because we have catalogues of folk songs, especially one written by Patrice Coirot in France. And in these catalogues, it indicates that we have only a very small number of versions collected in oral tradition, mainly in Europe, and a couple in Quebec and in Ontario in the 20th century. And the tune I have used to sing it comes from one of the French versions collected in France, because Brizard gives no tune. We have no tune in the prize paper. And this version found in the prize papers is by far the most ancient evidence we know of this song and of its circulation in space. So in many cases, songs in the prize paper give us a chronological history to folk songs known only from later ethnographic surveys before that. I'd like to finish with questions about the value and limits of these documents in the prize papers. The prize papers are like a photography of a type of songs that was circulating on ships in the Atlantic space at a precise time, 17th and mostly 18th century. I have talked about the circulations between Europe and the Atlantic space, but it's also true for other locations, especially the Indian Ocean, with many French songs found on Dutch ships with very interesting parallels to be made with oral tradition. I'd like just to take one example found in the archives of Georges d'Alban. I see Gustave who is with us, and I thank him for his help about this person. So Georges d'Alban, who was officer on the Saint Laurent, and after that he had other responsibilities. And he made a journey towards Batavia in 1795 for the Dutch East India Company. And we find several songs on separate sheets and notebooks of songs in different boxes related to his archives in the prize paper. And in one of the boxes, there is a notebook, this one, including 24 songs in German, Dutch, and French, mostly opera songs, not having passed into oral tradition. But also at the end, there is this song, a folk song often collected after that during ethnographic surveys, still very often heard today from oral performances in Quebec. And there is also, which is very rare, a musical score, very rare to have musical scores corresponding to songs having later been recorded in oral tradition. So I said, yes, we have like a photography of the songs in circulation. And in the same time, what we see in the prize papers is only the tip of the iceberg. It concerns only the ships that were captured, for which archives were seized, preserved, and catalogued. So very, very small part of the songs. And what is more, folk songs, popular songs circulated mostly orally. And it's an exception when they were written down. So we have only limited traces, and we miss the main phenomenon of oral circulation, which is not visible. A social analysis of the owners of these songs found on ship is still to be dealt with when we can identify them. Who wrote down songs and for what purpose? And clearly there is a large variety of profiles. And why did some people decide to bring song with them during their sea journey, knowing that there was not so much room to bring personal documents on the ship, but they gave priority to songs? And another question is to know when these songs were written down. Which songs were written before the journey? Which songs were written during the journey, because there is plenty of time for that on long distance ship travels? Were they written down after hearing them from other members of the crew? Were some of them composed on ships? An analysis of these songs, broadsheets and notebooks in a perspective of material culture and the materiality is also very important to understand the social uses of these documents and practices. For example, there are often different handwritings in the same notebooks, so a collective creation. So by whom, what for, with which social practices around these written songs. A problem of a prize paper is the fact that many of these songs were found in the HCA 30 series of miscellaneous documents, and very often archives of several ships were mixed up, and we don't always clearly know on which ship songs were seized. And another limit is that what we have are songs which circulated on ships, but it's only a paper, material copy. And it does not mean that these songs were performed, were sung on ships. Both things must be distinguished, and the prize papers are of poor use to document these aspects. We should look at other sources like travel relations or judicial archives to find little things about performance of songs on ships. And sometimes it's difficult to distinguish a versified poem not dedicated to be sung and a song. But in any case, the prize paper are a very precious, immensely precious material that allows to renew in depth what we know on the circulation of folk song between France and French colonies before the French Revolution. And the good news is that detailed inventories continue to be published regularly, and new songs will be available in the coming years and decades to enrich this study. I thank you very much, and I would be very happy to have your remarks and comments on this research. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Eva, for this fascinating insights into your research and for singing for us. That's a premiere, I think. That's really, really, really cool. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and I'm sure there are plenty of questions from our audience today. Please just notify us in the chat or raise your hand, and use the chance to stop the recording.